let's go to another fantastic guest. We are joined with the man himself, Kit Klarenberg. Kit Klarenberg, he's an investigative journalist documenting the role of intelligence services and shaping politics and perceptions. You can find his work on global delinquents, Grey Zone UK, and I think the last time I had you on, it was on the actual Grey Zone. Congratulations. How you doing, man? You doing okay today? Kit, I can't hear you. Wait, I can't hear you. Can't hear you. Your volume. Your volume, you're muted. Can you hear me? Yeah, he's muted. You're muted. I promise you're muted. Okay. Kit will be back. Great conversation with Warwick Powell. I always appreciate those conversations. The man really knows his stuff. Oh, don't be mad at me. Don't be mad at me. I just messed up. I made a mistake. Kit, let me bring you back on.
Hello.
Yes. Hello, back at you.
I was just saying, you read out the list of contributions to which I contribute, and I said, I'm a jack of all trades and master of none of them. But in all seriousness, no, I'm very well. Thanks for having me on today, Jamal. How are you doing?
Man, I'm glad. I am doing well. Better that you can join me. I really do appreciate it. It's always rough trying to fix a technical issue in the moment. It's like there's this pressure that is just on you. You're like, okay, what's wrong? No, man, I'm glad you can join me. I always like to bring you on. We have an article. It's out in one of the magazines. It doesn't really matter which magazine. If the article is good, I kind of like to talk about it. And you actually, before we get to the article, how's Serbia? It's calmed down, still tense?
Well, I mean, things are, things are, to say the least, a bit tense at the moment. There is a lot of speculation about foreign involvement in stirring up trouble, and I might add that in neighbouring Macedonia about 10 years ago, as I've reported for the Grey Zone, there was a MI6 sponsored quote-unquote colourful revolution where, as I document, the British ambassador to Macedonia, an MI6 officer, was handing out cash from his diplomatic pouch to young Macedonians and telling them to go and break stuff and start fires. There are certain parallels there. So as I say, yes, tense. It's something I'm personally avoiding for a variety of reasons. I think that the government's position is actually a lot stronger than might be being presented in the media. I see that the FT, the Financial Times, published a lengthy op-ed, effectively calling for the government's removal, which was pretty bold, and I think will only further lend further fuel to the fire that the unrest is being orchestrated by overseas actors. It actually there's an aspect of this which a lot of people have missed, which is, of course, we recently had the Alaskan summit between Trump and Putin. One of the responses by the Ukrainians, or indeed their British puppet masters, I more put the blame on them, has been they attacked the pipeline that supplies Hungary and Slovakia and Serbia with Russia.
Right? Is that what it's called? Druzhba? Something like that?
Yes. Yeah. And so and I might add that, yes, that Hungary, of course, has never applied sanctions to Russia. Slovakia initially did, then Robert Fico that was elected in late 2023 on an explicit anti-sanction, anti-war platform. He won by landslide, and Serbia has been under relentless pressure to impose sanctions on Russia and has refused to do so. So the attack on the pipeline is damaging to these three kind of quote unquote awkward squad countries who oppose or further European involvement in the war, or indeed favour neutrality. And that's just one example of a wrecking operation conducted by the Ukrainians or indeed the British around this. There in Ryazan, an area of Russia, there was a mysterious explosion at a factory which killed at least 20 people and injured many dozens more. And it's not at all clear who or what was responsible. My bet would be sleeper cells of chaos agents dotted around the country, and again, yes, probably trained by the British. That said, my overall impression of the Alaska Summit and indeed what's transpired since, I tend to deviate somewhat from the prevailing wisdom in both the kind of mainstream and independent spheres that this was effectively meaningless and maybe perhaps a waste of time. I mean, I think that actually it seemed pretty clear from Trump's statements during and after the summit, and also his body language, that he viewed this as important. He seems to have adopted Russia's position on several matters subsequently. So he of course, entered this summit with European leaders screeching and squawking, saying, "We demand a ceasefire, blah, blah." And he emerged from the talk saying, "We need a deal first before a ceasefire is implemented," which is the Russian position. He also, in advance of, and I caught the last minutes of your interview of your prior guest, with that very embarrassing picture of all of these European leaders prostrate at the throne of Emperor Donald Trump, in the lead up to this, Trump said, there's going to be no NATO membership for Ukraine, and there's going to the Ukraine cannot regain the territory it's lost, which is pretty bold and a very major departure from what European leaders and pundits and quote unquote journalists have been saying for 3.5 years now. I mean, it's not long ago we were being told about summer beach parties in Crimea, with Zelensky as the DJ of honor, and there was a lot of bombastic tub thumping about how the Ukrainians were not only going to drive Russia out of Donbass, but they were going to collapse the country and precipitate the end of Putin's reign of terror. All of that's gone now. Entirely, and the media. I see the Daily Telegraph, which is effectively a Ukraine propaganda outlet at this stage, and has a history of publishing extremely bad, which is saying something. Reports about how Russia's on the verge of economic, political, and military collapse weekly. They're now publishing articles admitting that Ukraine has lost, and one headline that particularly caught my eye was, actually, Ukraine doesn't even need the Donbass, which is why Ukraine has lost. Yeah. This is after, Ukraine has lost perhaps upwards of 1 million people trying to keep it. Suddenly it's not so important. The entire region is of no value to Kiev. But yes, so I saw several pundits whose opinions I respect and are usually pretty on point, suggesting that the Europeans were going to torpedo any moves towards peace. I think maybe at a surface level, on paper, this is the picture that emerges from their meeting, because they specifically took a firm line on Ukrainian security guarantees. They took a firm line on Ukraine's NATO membership, and also they committed to spending 100 billion on American weapons to give to Ukraine, which would be all well and good, except this implies or assumes that America has the weaponry to send to the Europeans to give to Ukraine, which it doesn't. It assumes that the European states and the EU more generally has the funds and the political will and the public support to do this, which it doesn't. And it also assumes that Ukraine has the people to use this weaponry and fight the war, which it doesn't. So it's yes, quite some cunning grand scheme there. And I made this point on a podcast, shameless plug, I'm afraid, Jamal, a podcast I regularly do with my dear friend and comrade Alex Mackay called Decline and Fall. We made the point in advance of the Alaska Summit. Well, any quote unquote commitment made by Trump to the Europeans or Zelensky can be reneged upon. And any demand that the Europeans make can be ignored, because ultimately, what are they going to do? And the answer is nothing. Like literally nothing. They are at this stage completely economically, politically, and militarily dependent on the US. Completely. They have no independence. They have no sovereignty. They have no independent war-fighting capability. They've drained all of their ammunition and weapon and vehicle stocks, arming Ukraine to no effect. So, I mean, what's how are they going to get Trump to roll over or even listen to their demands? Now, I mean, you know, Trump himself and members of his government, they have a track record of making extremely condemnatory, if not outright kind of mocking comments about the EU and Europe. And like recently we had Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, who openly said on Fox News, which is might as well be called Trump News, he said, well, we see Europe as a sovereign wealth fund to boost and regenerate American industry at home. And even the Fox News host was a bit taken aback by this and said, that's appropriation, i.e. theft. And so it's like, why Trump would cave to Macron saying, oh, please, can we get a guarantee of NATO membership for Ukraine? It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Like he might say it, but
yeah. I agree with you almost entirely, because I've been struggling with people who have a very different point of view than I do on this, and I'm like, it's like I gave an analysis of the press conference, and I was sitting here like, whoa, these guys are talking about an agreement, and I was like, I don't know what that agreement is, but they're talking about something. Then the very next day, Trump comes out and is like, we get in the war now. We just need Zelensky to fall in line. I'm backing the Russians. We want a permanent peace. Now, let's be honest. It's not a permanent peace, right? All things being equal, Donald Trump is still saying, hey, they can buy weapons from us. And effectively, we're giving them this theater. This is something that they are going to have to deal with. We don't want to deal with this. So it's not that he's man o' peace, Donald Trump. It's, no. I don't want to deal with this on the front end. We would help and we would kind of move the pieces around, but Europe is going to be the one who's effectively getting eaten by a Russian wood chipper. Like it's a little bit nebulous. It just sounds like a tactical withdrawal that Donald Trump recognizes that what's taking place on the battlefield is an utter disaster, and between saving face versus having a collapse, he prefers a saving face. Europe doesn't seem to be on the same page. So now I agree with you on this. I don't think it was minor. I think it was significant. I mean, to have the president completely change his rhetoric around this whole thing of ceasefire versus peace. Okay, that's a big deal. Now, the catch really does boil down to what happens next. I mean, if the trilateral talks are nonsense, I'm sorry, they just are. Like, for one, they haven't even established what they're going to the framework for those talks. Oh, give me your take. Do you think they're nonsense? I don't. They've called Zelensky illegitimate. No, I'm just saying they've called Zelensky illegitimate for years.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, there was his name is Alex Christoforou. I think I probably pronounced his name wrong. Sorry, Alex, I didn't. It's not personal, but like, yeah. He's part of the Duran, and he's an excellent commentator and analyst. Very, very much worth listening to. He pointed out this hilarious Politico headline, which stated that European heavy hitters are being sent to Washington with Zelensky, and and Alex made the point, those same heavy hitters who call Trump daddy and weren't invited to Alaska. I mean, you know, the trilateral talks between the US, Ukraine, and Russia could go ahead. I strongly suspect that Zelensky will be in the corner and asked to put his hand up if he wants to speak. You know, it's going to be like that level of talk. He's not viewed as legitimate. And I might add as well that there are two or three other aspects of this I think are very important to note, which is that number one, and I don't think this is a coincidence, on August 7th, as we're heading into the Alaska Summit, Gallup, the US polling giant, it published this extensive survey on Ukrainian public support for the war in Ukraine. And it showed that 69% of the public want the war over ASAFP. Okay, they want a negotiated settlement. They don't want to keep fighting. Only 24% of the population keeps fighting. Now, you've got to bear in mind that a lot of Ukrainians are, due to the brutal crackdowns on dissent and opposition under Zelensky, which intensified when martial law was imposed in February 2022, people are afraid of speaking out and openly speaking their minds. And there are examples of people who've had to flee Ukraine for criticizing the government. I mean, we have Gonzalo Lira, who died in a Ukrainian prison after being very critical of Zelensky. Bogdan Sarityuk, who was a left-wing anti-Zelensky critic of the war. He is in jail on vague national security charges for being critical of the government. So it's an environment in which people are scared to speak out. But so the actual true figure of Ukrainians who want this over is probably even higher than 69%, which is saying something, right? So there's that aspect. There's that aspect to consider as well, which is the only people who want this kept going are Western chicken hawks who want to tweet about how awful Trump is and how he's in Putin's pocket, but wouldn't dare go near the front line and probably would be killed within seconds if they did muster the intestinal fortitude to do so. But there's also another aspect to this, which I think is rather key, which is the war in Ukraine is a massive distraction and kind of endless drain on finite US resources at a time when they are gearing up to assist Israel in completely erasing Gaza, when both Trump and Netanyahu have indicated a willingness to restart war against Iran, and we know that, like, within the 12-day war that people seem to have forgotten about, but was a real kind of no-holds-barred attempt by Israel to foment regime change in Iran and completely cripple the country militarily, which backfired spectacularly. The US spent 20% of its stockpiles of air defense missiles defending Israel during this 12-day war. It will take up to 8 years to replace them. Right, like that, such as the US's lack of industrial capacity. So yeah, they can't keep sending weapons to Ukraine forever. And I think, you know, if for no other reason than wanting to ensure that Israel is secure, quote unquote, and has a free hand to keep waging belligerent wars of aggression and choice against its regional adversaries, which are multiplying in number all the time, and they're multiplying in strength all the time as well. He has a massive incentive to ending this. Now, I may well have have mentioned this on your show before, Jamal, and I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself on this point, but there is a very clear historical parallel to, I think, in recent memory, to the war in Ukraine, which is the war in Bosnia. Now, the war in Bosnia was encouraged by the US. The US supplied weapons and financial assistance to their Croatian and Bosniak proxies on the ground. They encouraged their proxies to reject every peace deal that was brokered by the UN or Europe or whatnot. And then after about 3 years of this, they got they got bored of the conflict and turned around to the Bosniaks and said, right, well, you have to accept whatever terms we put to you, and if you don't accept them, we're going to abandon you completely. And the terms of the peace deal they finally signed, with a pretty much literal gun to their heads, was worse than any prior peace deal offered to them while the war was going on and even before the conflict started. Okay, so I think that I can easily envisage, irrespective of the commitments and undertakings and rhetoric emanating from Brussels and Washington and even London, that when it comes to it, the US could very easily turn around to Zelensky and say, hey, these are the terms, accept them or you're finished. And that could include the handing over more territory than Russia currently holds. It could include harsher terms on how big their military can be, how many tanks and other forms of war-fighting equipment they're allowed to hold, which was a key component of the Istanbul talks, which Boris Johnson personally sabotaged in April 2022. There was a lot of very technical detail about, well, you're allowed to have this many troops in this area and no further. At that point, the Russians were amenable to Ukrainians joining the EU. They aren't now. The terms of that deal that Ukraine walked away from, they're never going to get as good terms as that ever again. And I think that the longer this goes on, the worse the terms are going to be for Zelensky et al.
Yeah, I mean, they're investing blood and treasure, of course, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like, they're inexorably moving west. And at some point, they're going to turn to Sumi and says, hey, Sumi, would you like to have a referendum? And they're going to turn to the next place. Would you like to have a referendum? I mean, I got to be honest with you. The one or two things is going to take place. Either a deal is going to be had or a deal is not. And from the Russian point of view, Ukraine will break. Donbass will fall within the course of this year, or at the very least, the very early beginning of next year. They cannot keep this up. Putin knows it. I suspect on some level Trump knows it, which is why they're on this full court press of saying, hey, you need to make a deal. You need to make a deal. You need to make a deal. Whether Zelensky would do it, who knows? From the Russian point of view, they may even want to keep going. Because and to get back to the trilateral conversation for a moment, Putin has said on more than one occasion, look, I'm not having a conversation with Zelensky if the framework and the preparation for that conversation hasn't been laid out. Period. Donald Trump is a belligerent in this war. He's not a negotiator. He is one of the main proponents of this war, meaning he's one of the main provocateurs. So Putin would have to sit down with two people that are associated with the war, with the United States being the lead actor in that, while simultaneously the US pretending as if they're not. So, it's one thing if you sit down and you've established, okay, this is the deal, and we just need to work through the gray areas. What Trump is doing is not that. Trump is just a kid who's hyperactive, who wants to get this over with, in which case the Russians are probably going to be like, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. That sounds okay. We need to talk about it more, etc. Basically, they're going to slow him down because they're not prepared for that yet. At least I don't think so. But give me your take. I mean, I don't know if Zelensky is fully rogue. I don't.
Well, as your prior guest was saying, it's interesting that, after that White House bust-up, where Zelensky was told to his face, you have no cards, the weapons did keep flowing. And yes, there are a lot of different layers and actors in this. There is, the CIA from since before Maidan, has had very close relations with the Ukrainians. The British are very heavily embedded with them, to the extent that even the mainstream media acknowledges that the Ukrainians see them as the brains of the proxy war. God help us all. But yeah, there are a lot of different moving parts here, and I struggle to see how a deal can be reached, because we've just seen, and as I think you mentioned, like Zelensky, before he came on, Zelensky has issued a statement basically reiterating what he's been saying all along, which is a peace deal from Ukraine's perspective is the return of their lost territory, billions in damages from Russia, and handing over Russian officials for trial for war crimes. And it's like, this is just not going to happen. Yeah. Like it's not going to happen in any universe. And I don't, irrespective of what they say, I don't think that Western leaders would even see this as desirable for a variety of reasons. I mean, if you think about all of the debates that have been had back and forth about, we've got all of these Russian assets we've appropriated, we can give to Ukraine, which comes up as an issue, every few months and then leads to nothing, because of the very obvious fear that, if we hand over all of this stuff that we basically stole from Russians, what country is going to want to put their money in a NATO state bank? Exactly. So I'm not really seeing like any real grounds for serious discussion. I think that Zelensky's intransigence is certainly being encouraged by the Europeans, again, particularly the British. I think that he understands that if when the war's over, he's going to one way or another be finished. The end of the war means elections, which he will lose. I know personally from speaking to Ukrainians in Serbia, of which there are a great many. They absolutely loathe Zelensky. Can see very clearly that they were led up the garden path by the Anglo-Americans. They want to give him a bloody nose, if not get him booted out of office. If Zelensky was to make any even the slightest concession, that's him getting murdered, probably very publicly and horribly, by Azov battalion. At the same time, purely by token of the fact that I think that the at least certain elements of the Western power structure want him in power, this probably feeds some sense of impunity in his administration. I can't really see them backing down, even if they don't have any cards. And there are perhaps enough people within the power structure who are willing to encourage and maybe to a certain degree facilitate that. So, I mean, ultimately, though, as I say, the lack of weapons to provide, the lack of people to fight, these are really serious issues that Ukraine is facing. Russia is making extraordinary gains on a daily basis, bursting through defensive lines because they don't have the people. Like Ukraine's war effort is basically drones now. And Russia is systematically identifying where the buildings where drone operators are hiding and obliterating them. So it's from a kind of battlefield perspective, it's not clear at all how much longer this can go on. Really, and yes, in that context, when you're negotiating, when the person you're negotiating with has demonstrated a willingness to attempt to sabotage negotiations consistently. Remember, I believe it was in June, or it might have been July, we saw Operation Spiderweb in advance of US Russia talks, and then for 3 days the media was exuberant and saying this shows that Ukraine's back in the game, they don't need the US. And then after this burst of burst of ebullience had worn off and reality kicked in, suddenly the entire media admitted that actually this was a bit pointless. It didn't really change, but it doesn't change the battlefield reality, and it's probably harmed Ukraine's negotiating position. So in that context, like, why would you see any value in talking to someone who refuses to back down despite the fact that they're in a terrible position, is willing to break agreements, was completely unwilling to implement Minsk for 8+ years? The Russians have no incentive apart from finishing this on the battlefield, and the inability of Western powers to equip Ukraine means that eventuality becomes more likely and more impending with every day.
Yeah, especially if what they're saying about the security guarantees. I mean, that's the thing, right? Russia hasn't said squat. Europe and the United States are talking to themselves. Donald Trump is a habitual liar, so you can't really take anything Donald Trump says is true in this. And so it's like, we have no idea what the deal is. We have no idea what the agreement is, short of they're not going to be part of NATO, which, again, how do you fully believe that? Like, how do you ensure that that's legit? I mean, at one point, neutrality was already in the Ukrainian constitution. They removed it at the point where they overthrew the government. So honesty, legitimacy, those things are credibility. They're just not there. And it's like, if you're the Russian side, how do you ensure that the credibility of whatever agreement you go with is sacrosanct, it's intact? I don't know how you do that. Also, all things being equal, I would think that Putin probably would want a deal. Because it's like, what's the alternative? You take all of Ukraine? I don't think he wants to do that. I mean, what may happen is Ukraine get to the point where there's so much at the breaking point that it is just completely obvious to everybody involved, this is about to collapse. And even then, that goofball still is probably like, we're going to continue to fight, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know. It seems that they may have to end up staying on the battlefield. And I could be wrong. We'll see. I mean, you might be right. He may turn to Zelensky, take the deal or else. I'm walking. Daddy's walking. Daddy's leaving. In which case, Europe is going to have a collective shit fit if Trump says that. So I want to get to your article, though, before you leave, because what time is it? We have time. Yeah.
We've got time. We've got time.
On the CIA. Oh, so that one more time. What was the last thing you said?
I said we've got time.
Oh, okay.